Come back with us, friends, to Concord, Massachusetts. Originally the home of Waban and the spirited native Indians, the crucible from whence was fired the shot heard round the world, and home of some of America's most prophetic voices, Emerson, Thoreau, Hawthorne, the Alcotts, Margaret Fuller. Greetings. My name is Stuart Sinclair Weeks. I'm the founder of the Center for American Studies here in Concord. A warm welcome to join us at what for many is considered the heart and soul of our nation. We look forward to sharing with you glimpses of our summer Village University celebration with participants and presenters from across the country and overseas. The Village University was inspired by Thoreau's words from Walden. It is time we had uncommon schools. It is time that villages be universities. To act collectively is according to the spirit of our institutions, and I'm confident that as our circumstances are more flourishing, our means are greater than the nobleman's. That is the uncommon school we want. Instead of noblemen, let us have noble villages of men, and we would add women. Join us as we greet the day at Louisa May Alcott's Orchard House, where she wrote Little Women, and where her father Bronson Alcott constructed an historic hillside chapel, the Concord School of Philosophy. Their neighbor and beloved friend, Ralph Waldo Emerson, wrote his essay Nature in 1836, which heralded America's cultural evolution and introduced transcendentalism, which became a major cultural movement.
Louisa May Alcott and her sisters, I think, were profoundly influenced in more ways than we perhaps know these days by their father's transcendentalism. Transcendentalism is, at least in part, the notion that you can transcend your own experiences and that there is something beyond. And Louisa May Alcott's writings seem to exhibit this even when she's writing novels, first of Little Women and then many, many sequels to the story, all of which is very autobiographical.
You know, at the very concrete level, Thoreau is contributing to modern environmental science simply because he kept records of when things bloomed here. He was the only person who was keeping such detailed records, so in some ways we know more about climate change in Concord than anywhere else in the world. And so I think part of the challenge is, can we fully develop this point of contact between the sort of humanistic practice of science and the very detailed collection of data that he was also doing.
Journey on with us to the banks of Walden Pond, made famous by Henry David Thoreau, and explore his cabin site. He wrote, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and not discover when I died that I hadn't lived."
So let me say in my Western way, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored, and I felt Henry David Thoreau's presence when I chose this spot. I'm very honored and pleased that you all came today to encounter this auspicious moment of the birth of the Eastern and Indian Studies Institute at Concord.
And that dream gradually took the form of a Concord Institute in the Concord spirit for Indian and Eastern studies. Native American presenters will enact ancient tribal rituals honoring the trees, earth, skies, land that are sacred to them.
So you see the sacredness that is involved with the land. It's a restoration and a reconciliation, as you've said. But this tree here is not Jethro's tree, but it is a descendant. It's a descendant of the great ancestor. I am a descendant of the people, the proud people of this particular land, Muscataquid. You are all the descendants of those in the beginning or those who came after, but you are the descendants of mankind. And honoring and respecting who and what people are is paramount to everything, to everything. I'm representing the tribe of the Praying Indians. But together on this day, we are all representation of the tribe of mankind.
Engage in spirited seminars at our old North Bridge, where our country's fight for independence began.
We're gathered here in Concord, Massachusetts, in a very interesting and historic spot. The structure behind us here in the background is a bridge that goes over the Concord River. And on the other side of that bridge, there's a statue and there's a poem written on the base of that statue. And the poem mentions something called the shot heard round the world. And what that was is the British in April 1775 sent troops out of Boston and marched up towards the spot with the intention of crossing that bridge and going to the other side of the river and going to some barns and houses there where they felt that the Minutemen, colonialists, were storing arms and ammunition to use against them. It was a shot where people who were experiencing a form of tyranny, in their estimation, under a larger foreign government, decided, stop, no further. We're not going to let you come any further. And if you cross this bridge, we're going to fight back. It was an event that put tyranny all over the world on notice, that the people are ready to be free, ready to seize their own sovereignty.
Nature uses dynamic flow. So this is flow form, that's our brand. Flow surface design, that's our technology. And what does it do? It recreates water's natural vitality plus oxygenation. This big application we're putting in is to be able to prove that we can measure the energetic light quality of water. We want policymakers and councils to test the water for municipalities and for use. Would it be possible to create for water a vessel which could manifest metamorphosis as demonstrated in the path of vortices phenomena? Because water is in terrible condition on our planet. Flowform created very effective complex dynamic flow, which I've already touched on briefly. That's where John was, okay, we can bring nature's capacity for complex dynamic flow into the built environment for stagnant water. We get rid of chemicals. We don't need anywhere near the machinery. When you deeply oxygenate water, the oxygen acts as a sort of almost burning instrument. It gets rid of pathogens and organic matter to some extent. But for purification, if there's the wrong minerals or chemicals in it, or if there's a lot of organic matter, you need to filter. That's when it needs its revitalizing.
And I thought to start with your angle of vision, people have been reading your work, and then their perspectives that others around the table have.
You should start with the assumption that if there are any problems, they're being caused by the system and not imposed from the outside.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
And that if a company is in really serious trouble, will usually be because of policies they know they're following. They make public speeches about those being good policies, And in the complexity of the situation, they don't realize that those are the policies that are causing the problem. The more I do to try to solve it, I make my problem worse. And you see companies go out of business. For example, I consulted for a number of years with the Cummins engine company that make diesel engines. I'm not a manufacturing man, but by the time I'd walked 100 feet in that factory, I knew something was terribly wrong. A third of the machines were shut off and nobody at them. A third of the machines were running, turned on, a workman beside them doing nothing. There were about a third of them that were actually cutting metal. And I stopped beside a man who was there doing nothing, and I said, what are you doing here? And he said, well, I'm waiting for parts to work on. And as you went through and talked to various people, you found that you had an organization where there was almost a deathly fear of having excess inventory. What that meant was that production line for diesel engines ran one whole month of January, never turning out a finished engine. Then you have to ask why. Why is this going on? The chief executive officer and the power in that company had probably encountered a room full of stuff that wasn't needed and wasn't used. And he said, why do we have so much of that? I'd had problems of a chief executive officer who would never speak to me again because I began to point out that the problem was of his own making.
It took somebody else coming in and being the troublemaker like we're all talking about to bring in and say, we need to bring other models in, right?
Everything that changes through time is under the control of feedback loops. Very few people realize that. You begin to understand the nature of feedback loops and how they operate, and it begins to unfold for you a rather whole new way of looking at life.
I prepared to show you my PowerPoint program with Tufts University's entrance hallway. It's about 4-story high open space. This is a detail of the same piece. Designing the sculpture in the new building is often much more freedom that I can have. Like this one, it's in hotel. Already hotel is there. And all the partition or window in the building. So I have to deal with those things, which sometimes trigger new ideas. For instance, this case, this side and the other side of this little window inside, I'd like to connect the sculpture between two spaces. This is the other side. So I came up with a very new idea of linking two spaces with the sculpture. That's fun to design something like that. Yeah.
The argument is that there's never been one America, but rather several Americas. We know that somehow the state boundaries aren't capturing something about regionalism. And yet, in times of uncertainty and discord, many Americans seek solace in the works of the Founding Fathers, hoping that if we returned to their ideals, if we understood and followed their intent, we could find our misplaced sense of common purpose, restore our civic strength, and bring the Union back to unity. But this effort is frustrated by the simple and really rather obvious fact that the men who came together to confront a common enemy in 1775 and 1776 and to craft an enduring alliance in 1787 to 1789 were not our country's founders, but rather the founders' great and great-great and great-great-grandchildren. And those founders shared little in terms of common purpose, intent, and ideals. Some embraced a specific Anglo-Protestant identity, others ethnic and religious pluralism. Some valued equality and democratic participation, others deference to a traditional aristocratic order modeled on the slave states of classical antiquity. Massachusetts is a regional culture founded, as you might guess, on the shores of Massachusetts Bay by radical Calvinists as a new Zion, a light on the hill. And since its outset, it has put great emphasis on perfecting earthly society through social engineering, individual self-denial for the common good, a familiar refrain to New Englanders, considered very strange in other parts of the country, and the aggressive assimilation of outsiders.
And then there was, of course, the moment in which the Declaration of Independence was sounded. What made this possible was towering individuals. It has been said that it was rare to have the collection of individuals that were present at the time of the Revolution. Washington, Franklin, Mason, Madison, and so forth. What made the American Revolution possible was the fact that it was a cultural ferment. There was a diversity of spirituality, religions. There were the Quakers, the Protestants, there were the Masons. Contrary to places in South America where mostly there was the Catholic religion, not much diversity in terms of culture. So the two poles that you talked about, the head and the heart, very strongly. Everybody was deciding between the two. And then comes Franklin, and he has completely his own approach to spirituality. He's the first spiritual scientist. He writes up the book, Articles of Belief and Acts of Religion. He outlines 13 virtues, which are temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, chastity, tranquility, and humility. And then he devises a very scientific way to put them into practice, which is to practice them each in a week, 4 times a year. Franklin is the father of a very widespread way, American way of learning. The Concord University was one example. He called it the Leather Apron Club, or the Junto, from joining in Latin. And that was the fact that learning could be done in a lively intercourse with each other. And that's the attempt that we're all living here. What came out of it? The Lending Library, the American Philosophical Society, among other things, were all born from this junta, where everybody in turn would present something and the others would collaborate with that person. Washington had a very ambitious, proud personality, very much a go-getter, very impulsive, allied with the fact that he was a reticent speaker. He would speak only when needed, and he was a very good listener. He embraced the non-importation agreements in response to the Stamp Act, and then he turned away from growing tobacco and cultivated micro-industries of transformation. And he had the most ingenious rotation system, which is 7-year rotation crops, and then compost building, pastures, and became financially independent, paid off his debt, and left the system of monoculture.
I just actually finally got to take the tour of Louisa May Alcott's home and be actually inside. And my intention today was to honor the spirit of Louisa May Alcott in an artistic way. So I hope you can all enjoy it. I know that for some of you, you do not do art very often. So I'm hoping to make it easy on all of you and fun, and maybe open up a little doorway into getting to do it for yourselves a little bit more. We're going to each take a board which has paper on it. I'm going to give you a pencil, and I want you to go seek some place here that to you, small thing. It could be a small plant, a stone, a chair, a tree, a corner, a window, a door, and try to sketch, even if it's just the gesture of that item, that place, some place that to you makes you connect with Louisa May Alcott, something that you think she might have liked, a place that she might have leaned against or sat or potentially loved.
house, a little girl sitting on a chair on the two big trees, and she is looking at house that I love my house.
Milkweed, I'm sure that's a historically correct patch of milkweed. I'm sure it is. And of course the monarchs need this milkweed.
I was immediately pleased by the sort of chaotic jumble of gables on the roof that was very suggestive of spaces under it. I can imagine if I was a kid growing up in a house like that, I'd know where my room was, and I'd have it sort of psyched in relation to each gable, each vent. The chimneys would be places that the house would breathe.
First thing that caught my attention really was that pole with the ribbons on it. I can just picture the girls laughing and running around the pole.
I love this building. This was designed in Goethe's architectural ideas.
I was taken with the angles too. The left one has 4 panes in each, the top and the bottom, and the right one has 6 panes.
Picture the Alcott girls coming out of their house, playtime or whatever, and this big tree here drawing their attention as a place to play around, having a nearly wraparound bench which they could have girl talk around it.
The groom went to the barn, brought back a long white root. It was not a carrot, nor a parsnip, nor anything she had ever seen. He snapped the root and gave her a generous piece of it. As she ate, it felt enlivening. It surprised her. She asked, "What is this?" The friend replied, "This is a light root." 50% of the people that have eaten the plant actually have a visceral feeling, not unlike a cup of coffee, but it comes in later, like 45 minutes after. The plant had tremendous healing abilities. And Steiner, in an ideal world, would have liked to see the light root. He felt that it was food that influenced our thinking processes.
Is it just the root that has the healing effect, or is it the leaves?
I take all the leaves out and put them in great big bags for salad makings, and people cut them and put them in like arugula.
If you eat it from the root, the leaf, the flower, and then you can go into the oils and the essence, flower essences.
I did not know that years before Rudolf Steiner in his agricultural discourses discussed the light roots as being a uniquely healing plant for modern humans. And I think our friend Stuart here has a dream, which is a symbolic dream, which I think is a very good dream, which is to grow that plant here at the Thoreau farm at some point. And he was instrumental in helping us get nodes this year from which the plant grows.
Because if you really think about it, there is something that precedes everything, and that is the attitude. The quality of anything that you do, in this case the bread, it comes from a change of our attitude, it comes from the heart. So that's the first quality ingredient, not from corruption, but from dedication and service. There are many farms that don't have their compost made correctly. It's a thing about temperature. Compost needs to be built in a pyramid shape, because otherwise you get this dip and water collects and you don't get the proper fermentation. Of course, it starts with biodynamically grown grain, and when the grain is given the chance to dry on the field, it becomes easier to digest. This is maybe the first reason why people have problems digesting the modern grains, because they're not allowed to ripen fully. They're harvested and threshed at the same time. So Rudolf Steiner said when the farmers noticed that the grain degenerated and the food crops was degenerating, he said, well, you have to go back to the wild grasses. This is the windmill. When I had my bakery in Holland, I was the only baker in town who grew organic wheat, so then you don't get the commercial yeast.
And does anybody else know anything about mine? I was in a workshop with Marcel Marceau, had the great honor and pleasure. Stay together in our summer. We're going to have an energy ball. You really feel the energy. When it comes to you, feel that energy.
Levels of consciousness was one of the important parts of the mysteries, and it was your first initiation was being able to see into and experience this etheric realm and experience the ethers and so on. And when you got there, you experienced yourself. You could be seeing who you were when you made that first level. And this could be very scary. So now I'm going to come to one of your points, which is in those days it was felt one had to be guided because what you saw and experienced could be so damaging to your sense of fear, to your courage, that you couldn't even continue in life. It would be so overwhelming. The Hierophant or the guru would guide you, took you there, walked with you in every step that you took, and explained everything to you. So we have 3 states below our everyday awake state. The question is, are there perhaps 3 levels above? And this wonderful painting shows 3 levels with 3 levels in each, or the 9 levels of the hierarchies. It's called The Ascension of the Virgin by Francesco Battassini. Now, here we're down here on earth at the tomb. And notice the darkness all around. You know, you can see some light back in here, but they're in the darkness. And what's also interesting here is if you look really closely, you can see that there are human beings painted in here amongst the heavenly hierarchies or the heavenly hosts, indicating that this artist felt that these individuals had reached this level in their consciousness. As late as the 15th century, the church was allowing painting to include these beings of the hierarchies. It's actually not so much the Catholic Church, but the Protestant Church that gets rid of the hierarchies and focuses just on the singular God, the Father, Christ, Holy Spirit, and combines them all as one God.
I was really thrilled to be in a town that had a statue of the Pietà. Concord's a very special place and a very unusual place, as I'm sure those of you who are part of the Village University have been experiencing. The statue is owned by Holy Family Parish and all kinds of connections to the town as well. But basically what the Concord Pietà is it's a hand-sculpted replica of the original. It is not the same size as the original, which is also really important. It's maybe about 2/3 the size. So what that means is that the sculptor basically had to go from some version of the original, most likely some kind of a plaster cast, and then draw down in terms of the size that he or she created. So in 2007, my dad was terminally ill. Given that, I wanted to do something in his memory, and I also wanted to do something with the statue. And so I decided to look into getting it restored. Miro, the sculptor, made Mary a new thumb. He drilled a nail into this part of the statue. He got a block of Carrara marble in New York City, and he came and repaired Mary's thumb. I'm happy to say that I was the model for Mary's thumb, which is about the closest I guess I'm going to get to being that close to Mary. Do we want to move it? Thank you.
There was a big sign at a psychology convention, big sign, I mean thousands of 25,000 or I don't know how many psychologists show up to those things. Big sign that said, the human being needs God like a fish needs a bicycle. You know, that was the attitude. And all of this stuff about religion and anything even in spirituality was anathema, because they thought they had thrown all of that out, and it was all superstition. Maybe it had helped some weak-minded people, you know, send their kids to Sunday school or something, but it's not the truth of what the human being really is. Well, what if you find that, yes, people are developing a sense of self as an agent, but if they don't start opening to a higher influence, that agency becomes more and more and more effective at getting what I want. So I'd hear some students say, I want to be a millionaire by the time I'm 30, period. I don't care how I get it, that's what I'm going after. So I'm an agent, I'm going to go after it, but it's just this accumulation of stuff and getting what I want. And you don't get any of this morality and all that stuff in the way. And it's just sort of like in business now, that people get fired, get pink slips and so on, but the high-level business person, if they aren't into something higher, just say, well, that's business. No, that's just business.
So I thought the best way to protect the environment is to share my love of the environment. And so I had started this friends group about 10 years ago. We were told that during the building of this pipeline, which would carry fracked gas, I don't know how many of you have heard about fracking. Yep. Fracking is the newest way that gas is mined from the earth. And the fracking process puts all sorts of toxic chemicals into the ground, and the wells that bring the gas up leak, and those poisonous chemicals get mixed with the groundwater. So what's happening through fracking is our water supply that we depend upon to survive is being poisoned by fracking. So the fracked gas in Pennsylvania at an area geologically called the Marcellus Shale, they need to take the gas from there and they need to bring it east, all the way east to Dracut. Dracut is a hub for gas pipelines. A pipeline already goes along the southern part of Massachusetts to Dracut. Currently, there's a pipeline carrying gas down from the Canadian Maritimes to Dracut. That pipeline is being converted so it can carry gas up to the Canadian Maritimes. So what has become obvious is that the gas pipeline is needed by the gas companies, not by us.
So it's through Emily's grassroots efforts that the whole thing is spread throughout town. She has raised everybody's awareness.
And these pipelines are spreading through the land, and they are harming the land and the water and the air because these pipelines leak.
I'm imagining while you were speaking, these guys sitting there rolling their eyes, oh, here's one of these sentimental, melancholic environmentalists here. And they're saying, we've solved these fracking problems. We no longer pollute. We've got all these monitoring systems along. The pipeline is going to be buried, and above it will grow blueberries, and the deer and all these other things that you all love will have places to eat.
They had the nerve to say to some people that if the pipeline crosses their land, they'll have their own private cross-country ski trail. Oh,
yeah.
There are no writings of Socrates. What we know of Socrates, we know because of two men, Xenophon and Plato. And so tonight's performance is an adaptation of the 19th century translation by Benjamin Jowett of Plato's Apology. And the charges were corrupting the youth of Athens and also impiety or not believing in the gods. So he defends himself against said charges. So if you can all blink your eyes for a moment and imagine we're back in ancient Athens and there are 500 jurors in this room, I am going to try to defend myself against these said charges. This villainous corrupter and misleader of youth, and if someone asks them why, what evil does he practice or teach, they do not know, they cannot say. They repeat the well-worn phrases about philosophers teaching up in the clouds and under the earth and having no gods and making the worse appear the better cause, because they don't want to admit that their own pretense, their own lack of wisdom has been discovered. But I have one more favor I must beg of you. When my children are grown, I would ask you to punish them and trouble them as I have troubled you, if they care more about riches than about virtue. And I would ask you to reprove them as I have reproved you, if they think they are something when they are really nothing. And if you do this, I and my sons will have received justice at your hands. The hour of departure has arrived and we go our ways. I to die, you to live. Which is better? Only God knows.
Hello, I'm John McManus. I'm a faculty member in the theatre department at Point Park University. I teach voice, phonetics, dialects, Shakespeare acting, and Shakespeare voice and speech.
Just feel this rising and lifting. And it keeps going, and we do have to keep our feet on the floor. That's what makes it a lift. And now we'll find the sound that goes with that. We just simply lift one hand. Yee, yee, yee. Yeah, now let the sound, let the whole body speak. So don't just speak with your mouth, but let the whole body speak, just silently. We'll hear it. And if I go sort of like this, you see what happens? I've gone in one direction. I've lost my center. But if I go and I'm upright, so this grows as I place, then it becomes powerful. It becomes real. It's walk. It's there. You know what I mean? Just a simple step. From a tree above you, something comes through, right down through, and you just, crossing the arms. Good.
Mark Antony finds the murdered body of Caesar. Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth, that I am meek and gentle with these butchers. For thou art the ruins of the noblest man that ever lived i' the tide of times. Woe to the hand that shed this costly blood. Over thy wounds now do I prophesy, which like dumb mouths do ope their ruby lips to beg the voice and utterance of my tongue. A curse so light upon the limbs of men, domestic fury and fierce civil strife shall cumber all the parts of Italy. Blood and destruction shall be so in use, and dreadful objects so familiar that mothers shall not smile when they behold their infants quartered with the hands of war. And Caesar's spirit, ranging for revenge, with Arte by his side, come hot from hell, shall in these confines, with a monarch's voice, cry havoc! Let slip the dogs of war, that this foul deed shall smell above the earth, with carrion men groaning for burial.
Shakespeare, Homer, Dante, Chaucer saw the splendor of meaning that plays over the visible world. For him, the final work of art is one's life. That our poems, our sculpture, our paintings, our music, those are all but dress rehearsals. And that the final work of art is our life. And so he's looking at the life, the reputed life of Shakespeare, and saying, where is there anything redeeming, where is there anything outstanding to be found, and questioning on that basis. And he and Whitman and others weren't certain that the man from Stratford-upon-Avon was the author of the works.
The question is, well, how and why did the human being that created this create this, whoever he was? And basically we're told it's this guy from Stratford, and self-taught, came to town, worked his way up and all this. And then a lot of people, they go, no, I cannot marry the man to the verse. There's always this nagging problem that somehow there's something wrong here.
A lot of artists and a lot of writers are the ones who said this story cannot be the true story.
Yeah, and if you look at a list, it's just people that are in the business, a lot of actors, writers, artists. I don't know anything about the White House, but Shakespeare, he could do this stuff all the time. He could write about places he hadn't been. He'd write this wonderful stuff. I will study Shakespeare and figure out how he did what he did, and then I, writing about the White House, who's never been in the White House or government, can, get a clue. Well, after several years of research, what he found was that all the current books on about Shakespeare did not explain this one critical fact, he thought, which was, how did a guy from the country wind up writing all his plays about kings and queens and court, and all the drama and all the intrigue? And then he encountered us and immediately became one of those who crossed over when he saw that the current favorite story that's really leading is a guy called the Earl of Oxford, Edward de Vere, who was a courtier and close to the Queen, was the best candidate to be the true Shakespeare, not the guy from the country.
Edward de Vere married the only daughter of Burleigh because Burleigh wanted to be on the throne. This was all about who was going to be on the throne of England. All of this was about that because he was going to be the next king.
In thinking about what to offer at this moment, what could be more appropriate than Little Drummer Boy, which was composed by Catherine Davis in 1944, a music instructor at Concord Academy who had long been affiliated with the Surratt Summer Music Sessions. Come, they told me, pa-rum-pa-pum-pum, a newborn king to see, pa-rum-pa-pum-pum. Our finest gifts we bring, pa-rum-pa-pum-pum.
Different words for the same. Welcome, and we're delighted to have so many people here and to have this wonderful young lady to play for us. I've been hearing her practicing and sounds wonderful.
So first, a heartfelt thanks to the Francos to open your home and to reach out to friends and to create a space for the first in a series entitled the Thomas Whitney Surratt Concert Series for the love of music. And this concert series is about inviting young, gifted artists, musicians who have a gift. And gifts are meant to be given away to come to performances, offer performances in a house setting, house concerts as in the olden days, with people who are here because they have an understanding of the importance of love, doing something out of love first and foremost. Megan is 10 years old.
Actually,
11. And that's important. That from 10 to 11 is important, as I'm sure we all can remember. I'd like to read you a little glimpse of Thomas Whitney Surratt. before we start. Surratt found himself playing the organ at Emerson's funeral. So if you know the First Parish Church, he was upstairs looking down. When I first heard that, I had an inner picture, and the picture was of Emerson holding out the torch, if you will, of what had been a literary and philosophical impulse that Surratt then took up and transformed into a musical impulse. Teaching and performance is an art, not a mere science. To impose a rigid system on the teaching or performing of any art is to destroy the art and the teacher. So a perspective from Thomas Whitney Surratt, and a warm welcome, Megan.
Today I will be playing the Bach Partita No. 1 in B flat and the Beethoven's Appassionata Sonata. Thank you.
It's not often that music brings tears to my eyes, but you just did.
Thank you.
Find a place where you can nurture your special passion. Get into the music for the music's sake. What inspired Beethoven? What is inspiring you?
The question we're trying to take up is entitled Towards the Healing of Our Modern Medical Model. I've been struck that there's some who say that the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, and then if you take another fact and put it beside it, iatrogenic illnesses, or illnesses caused by treatment itself, are close to the #1 cause of death today. So friends, we have Anne Blake Tracy with us.
Hi, Anne.
One of our Joan of Arcs in the profession.
Anne Blake Tracy, PhD, head of the International Coalition for Drug Awareness, author of Prozac, Panacea, or Pandora. The last 17 years of my life have been devoted to researching, writing, and lecturing about these drugs. In spite of that, two of my nieces in their early 20s, a decade apart, attempted suicide on antidepressants. The first on Prozac, the second just a month ago on Wellbutrin.
Hi, Ann. I'm Steve Lappin. I have a 45-year history of bipolar disorder.
There's a sense in which the tail wags the dog, and that I think part of the reason why medicine has taken the direction it has, which is a sort of biologically obsessed model, is that it's driven by the insurance gatekeepers. And I think too often, in psychiatry at least, that many clinicians will not accept insurance. They will insist upon a person who utilizes that service to come up with a fee, and then for the patient to do battle with the insurance to be reimbursed.
This is a letter from Patch to one and all. And I'm thrilled that people are getting together, clearly knowing that we cannot fix our vulgar, greedy medical business. It's really a business. We need models of care. I regret that I cannot participate, but this meeting on the 18th will bring us closer here to creating that model that will eliminate over 90% of the healthcare costs. So I ask those in the panel, and those listening what models you are working on. If we have 10,000 models, there's a good chance that the existing system will be influenced.
Psychiatry began moving down this path of, quote, the medical model. It's really a disease model, where they isolate some sort of symptom in a person, or like a kid's fidgeting in the classroom. That's all it's all his problem, right? The ADHD kid. It's not like any sense that the classroom might be inappropriate for some kids.
It's really making this culture sick. That is, we consider the care of a human being a cost.
I chose family medicine. Now, I have to have a calling in order to choose this profession because I do so much of the grunt work of medicine. I make referrals for colonoscopies. I care for families, and I get paid a fraction of a specialist. Wherever there is a profit, like hospitals, they have to have the beds filled in order to run. In Vermont, if I don't be a participant with insurance companies, I'm not allowed to practice. And if I had it to do over again, I don't know that I would recommend going into family medicine. This is getting harder and harder and harder. And when ICD-10 comes down the pike in 2015, October, I might not be able to practice as a family country doctor anymore.
My heart breaks for those who have not turned around and tried to make something right, like Candace did, and like Dr. Marcia Engel has, and Dr. Don Ioannidis, but they have tried to warn us of these problems, because if they don't, it will take them an eternity to be able to experience all that they have caused as a result of these very deadly drugs.
Lynn, what touched me most in your words were, I believe we've all come to earth because we have a calling. We have a particular calling, and that we have not just a right to pursue that calling, which we can disclaim if it's just a right, but we have a responsibility. And when you said you're not sure you can continue to practice, that touched a chord quite deeply in me. Because what I'm hearing is that because of the almighty dollar, you might not be able to do what you've come to earth to do.
So again, it's so important to be quiet inwardly. Notice what happens when you hear this word. And then you grab your chalk and you make a color gesture. Unite. Ten more seconds. Okay. Penetrate. About 10 more seconds. Prepare to receive, please. Healing.
Self-replication means that a nanoparticle has the ability, if it's swimming in a soup of the right source materials, that it can replicate itself. So the idea here is, can we do what a virus does, or can we do what a bacteria does, or can we actually take a bacteria and have it make nanoparticles that we want? One of the scientists in this worried about if that happened and it slipped out of the lab, would the world become covered with a gray ooze? Now, as unlikely as that is, it is still a concern. I wanted to put that out there, that that is a direction they're trying to go. Any food product from China, the packaging material most likely has silver nanoparticles in it to keep it safe.
One of the great dangers is that a lot of things that are taken into the body, deposits of minerals and metals, migrate to the brain. And that's one of the possibilities, that nanoparticles loose in the body will eventually migrate into the brain and be deposited through the circulatory system.
We have it in clothing. We have it in all sorts of machines, sports equipment, automobiles, airplanes.
To offer a complementary scenario vis-a-vis
Thank you.
the scary scenario, you offered advances in the human genome, mapping it completely in two different ways by 2003, 2004, as including Dolly, the sheep that was cloned. The nano level is very different. We're talking about, as I understand it, more physical objects than life objects, and more codable objects than what DNA is also coding.
That's what we need to find, is a way to make the nanoparticles inert rather than deadly. And today, what we're finding is that they're deadly on their own, that they have this ability to kill what's in their immediate environment. An individual from the Iroquois Nation worked with this legend of the peacemaker, and I used this story of nanotech to sort of question the Earth Mother and whether or not there's any future here for the Earth Mother, so to speak. And his answer is that we have to trust the spiritual beings. We have to trust that what they are allowing to come to the earth is something that we can meet.
Have you ever heard about the burning bush? So a majority of you probably heard that story, right? God spoke to Moses. And what did he do? He gave him a law that said people should adopt and follow these laws. And when we look at the Ten Commandments and what it says, if we all followed it, what type of a world would we all be living in today? Now our peacemaker said the same thing. He came to our people and he said, there's no more war. We're going to replace war with love, understanding, unconditional love, and we'll use spirituality to overcome the problems in the world. But again, like everybody else, it all depends where your faith is. We all know, each and every one of us, that there are times in our life when we are reduced to humility to try to say to that other person, how can we make it better? Because if we don't make it better, there's no peace. And what's the ultimate reason why we come to this world? It's to be happy. What I say to you is that these teachings, that this knowledge, that each and every one of you be blessed in a good way, that these teachings help you and guide you, not only you here, but all of your family, light in the way. And these were some of the things that I said in my own language.
Hawthorne wasn't necessarily happy about being withdrawn. In fact, he makes comments about it almost to the time of his death.
Emerson lost almost everybody he loved.
Well, so did Hawthorne.
Including his beloved wife.
Yeah, Hawthorne was withdrawn because of his living in solitude for such a long block of time. And his childhood essentially was the same thing. I mean, once his father died and his mother takes to her room, essentially closes the children off and lets her mother take care of the kids. Hawthorne got used to being alone, and it became, it was just a fact of life. And because of that, being isolated and being in a situation where you're on your own and you'd better figure out what you're going to do. Well, Hawthorne did just that. He figured out what he was going to do. He saw all these things that had gone on in his life and in other lives, and he takes these and draws the lessons from them and translates them into these stories that, as I said, they cause people to think, and that's one of the things that makes Hawthorne a true genius.
Bronson Alcott had an extraordinary genius. He had a genius that could recognize and embrace one and all. He could bring together the heavens and bring together the earth. And this manifested itself, above all, in this chapter of our history. To conclude, there have been books, the books that have been written about the Concord authors or by the Concord authors could fill a small library, indeed. But I would say the culmination of their work in the Concord School of Philosophy, the culmination of all their striving, there's yet to be one book written about this chapter of our history. And so this is an endeavor the Center for American Studies is involved in telling the story. And it's a story preeminently of Alcott and his genius, who Emerson spoke of as one of the greatest minds of the age. So with that, I turn to you, Phyllis.
A toast to Bronson Alcott, who was right about so many things. He was right about education, right to favor and practice a dialogic way of teaching. He was right to want to enroll a black child in his Boston school. He was right to invert the disciplinary impulse to have a student hit him, to see empathy as central to learning. And this is the kind of knowledge Alcott could spark for others. So here's the Bronson Alcott, prophet, seer, and transcendental spark plug.
Rick Wheeler is with us, has been a longtime friend and supporter of the Orchard House, the Alcotts, and all who are involved.
Bronson was still writing after the children's great books that were circulating. I was asked to say a few words about Bronson tonight. What I have heard from all of you is such a reinforcement to his nature and to the contributions he gave. In so many ways was a man, an individual, able to be of so much assistance and guidance with the opening of Fruitlands. This had been a simmering goal within the community of the educated and religious people, particularly the Transcendentalists. They had said, we are together as a community. We are together as a family. And sure, they were going to different churches and things of that sort, but the community that was identified as a principal aspect of Fruitland was one that carried support from the top of Concord's leadership. Emerson was there, yes, others, and as I've said. Well, Bronson may be criticized when you bring up his name today, but that's, in my mind, a terrific and tremendous error, because the gift that he was sharing and giving, and given to his children as they had gone forth, was a gift that he was giving literally all around the country. I'll pause there. Oh, thank you.
So Margaret Fuller, America's founding feminist, before 1848 had written a book, A Woman in the 19th Century, which asked the question not only how women could get their civil rights, but much more how they could become full people in an organic, transcendental universe that is full of divinity, which she imagines as both male and female. In the midst of becoming a partisan in the Italian Revolution, she had a love relationship with an Italian man, probably married him, had a child, and was coming back from that revolution and love when she drowned coming into Fire Island. In terms of influence in today, she's a first foreign correspondent at a very powerful moment that helped create the modern world. So that is her essence as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
I mean, there are many Thoreaus. The one I'm focusing on is the mystical Thoreau. They're both saying that the true scientist is to interpret most people's ability to see and experience. They both decry the fact that specialization has separated the true scientist from his connection to the cosmos. Thoreau says, wisdom does not inspect but behold. The true man of science will know nature better by his finer organization. He will smell, taste, see, hear, feel better than other men.
Thoreau was so good at showing those connections in his writing, which I know my students always gravitate toward, where one minute you're in this detailed description and then it becomes a metaphor. Many of my students have felt like they have been hurrying all their lives. They had no childhood. There's not really even any time to play outside. There's no outside any longer. There's, whatever. And then to be able to say, okay, if I'm teaching the seminar in the fall, then we'll be reading autumnal tints, and we go outside. And students are excited to come back, and they found a scarlet leaf. It's like, wow, it's like the rarest, but it's their first discovery of actually being able to identify something before you can see. I think all the transcendentalists do that, but Thoreau in particular really gives us a way. I think the students are glad to be able to feel as if they are learning to see on their own through being able to immediately take that into some kind of lived action.
But for my students, particularly, Emerson is especially meaningful about change. And that's, college students are, they think they are the ones that invented change in some ways, that change is only happening to them. They're very caught up in all kinds of changes. And there are two kinds of changes that Emerson talks about so eloquently. One is the change that we initiate, that we actually try to court. Whether it's universal suffrage or abolition, and I think he celebrates that in circles. He just totally enjoys everything about change in circles. And the other one that's also important to my students, it's the unsought change that happens to us, the change that we have to endure. Things like climate change, things that are more amorphous to them, even as science students. I'm shocked at how many of them have lost someone very dear already. This is about abiding change. This is about living with change. What my students like is what Emerson has to say about personal identity and its importance. He talks about the importance of the individual not as autonomous, but as relational. We become individuals in relation to other people, not as apart from everybody else. I think for Emerson, enlightenment is a practice. It's not an endpoint. It's not a destination. It's thinking by metaphorical leaps that are timed to this pulse of experience that's constantly, moving us.
I may say your students are very fortunate. We're talking about the presentation of what we're looking at for next year.
Here in Concord, we ought to focus on what was started here and then what happened to that getting just kind of lost. And all those starting points are waiting to be revived.
We journey on to Author's Ridge to pay our respects to Concord's celebrated writers. Henry David Thoreau's life philosophy can be summed up with the words simplify, simplify. Look at the gravestone. What could be simpler? And those who heard the talk on Hawthorne, which was brilliant, this is more than just a gravestone, isn't it? Because of the feeling we had for his life. I remember when I brought Francis Edmonds here, he was touched by the two gravestones, one at the foot and one at the head. And here too is mentioned Sophia, Nathaniel's wife, and their daughter Una, oneness. And in light of what we said before about the praying Indians, Hawthorne was not a traditional Christian, I can assure you. Here we have a clue.
you.